Thank you for joining the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast with your host, Clayton Craddock.
Welcome to Broadway Drumming 101. My guest today is Michael Ahrens, which a lot of people call you Ahrens. Should I call you Mike? Should I call you Ahrens? Should I call you Michael Ahrens?
I honestly don't know what people call me, but
as long as they call you.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I actually prefer all of those. Ahrens has been something that's kind of just, I don't know if it was when I started working with Michael Keller that happened or what, but that's kind of a new phenomenon, I think.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, Michael Ahrens is not only a fantastic friend of mine that I've known for decades, he's also an amazing guitarist and one of the most important and influential and a person that you would probably need to know because he's a contractor, music coordinator and contractor of many things in New York City. Which, first of all, I just want to ask you, what exactly is a music coordinator and what exactly do you do?
So a music coordinator is the traditional thought is we hire the band. But I always say that takes an afternoon of phone calls. That's really where the work begins. That's the part of the job that people think has the most cachet or is the most attractive or seems the most important. And it is. I mean, forming the right group of people, that have, that share the same musicality for whatever project you're working on, or bring something unique, or of course work well together, that are great people and players that will fit in together in a unit. That definitely does take some thinking and, research and vetting and all kinds of stuff before you actually make that afternoon of phone calls. But I like to say that's where the work begins. So what does a music coordinator do? After that, and probably before that too, for Broadway, once a music coordinator comes onto the production, it's usually after a workshop phase or a reading, or the piece is written, the music is written, the book is written. They're getting ready, they're prepping it for a staged production. They don't get to the music coordinator till they're thinking about the band. They probably have a drummer, they have a music director. Maybe they don't have a drummer. They definitely have a music director, probably a number two, an associate music director, or a couple people that are working on it with the composer, with the writers and the choreographer and the director. Maybe they've gone out of town. Maybe they've done a production already, and now they're working on it, fixing things. They know what didn't work. They're fixing the show, prepping it for pre-Broadway or Broadway or off-Broadway. And by the time I get the call, that's when they're starting to think about the band. So they're probably getting ready to run cast rehearsals for Broadway production. And they've decided on the size of the orchestration. So there's been an orchestrator now who's fleshed out a piano vocal score or just, concept into what is now an 8-piece band, a 10-piece band. What is the sonic makeup of the show? How many musicians they're going to, and what instruments they're going to play. And then, of course, what theater it's going to go into. We can talk about that later, but there are minimums and there's some restrictions and some freedoms about how many musicians you can have in a theater on Broadway. So once you get to that point, now you know how many musicians, you know what they're going to be playing. Now you need someone to put it together. Again, a couple conversations, afternoon of phone calls. Perhaps the music director or composer has people that are already attached or that want to be attached to the show. They'll have some suggestions. But then that's where the work begins. Now you're working for a production, and you're the liaison between a production and the union, because these are union jobs, and you're protecting the musicians, and you're protecting their best interests. They are union members. You have to be an expert on the contract that they're working on, what the rules are, what the rates are, and you're in production meetings with the production and the technical team and the production managers and stage managers, talking about the scheduling, talking about how many rehearsals we're going to have, how many hours, where it's going to be, where people are seated in the pit, what equipment's going to be around them. Are they going to be on stage? Are they going to be in costume? Are they going to be near machinery? Is there ventilation in the drum booth? Is there enough airflow? Is there enough? Is there HVAC? Is there fog machines on stage? Are there all of these things that are going on that people say, oh, we're going to do this or we're going to do that? There needs to be a department head that can say, okay, but here's the rule and here's what you can do. Here's what you can't do. Here's how much it costs. Someone at the top that understands that and can make decisions that's not part of the creative team. And I think that's the part that people don't get, is they think that the music coordinator is this flashy job that you just walk around hiring people.
Well, I mean, before you go on with that, I'm not trying to like eliminate your job at all, but why wouldn't the union have that position at Local 802?
Have what position? The thing that
music coordinator. Like, okay, these are the rules for Local 802. If you're going to hire somebody,
because the union, it's against labor law. For the union is not an employer. That's something people don't understand too, that they should know. When there's an issue, or when they say, why isn't the union doing this? Why isn't the union doing that? The union is a collective of members that create a collective bargaining agreement or collect area standards and in a jurisdiction, and they're the enforcer, but they're not the employer. They can't be. It's against labor law. There's the employer, and then there's employees. And in a union job, the collective bargaining is between the union entity and the employers. So it's protecting. It's a protective entity.
Yeah, people have agents. People have managers. Actors have agents. Why can't music? Are you like a musician's agent?
If the concept is that you help people find and place them in musical jobs that would work for them, yes. But agents take a cut, so they're hired by the actor or by the musicians in this instance. So no, I'm hired by the production. I don't take a piece from a player. There's no incentive other than I'm on a gig, and my job one of the jobs is to hire the musicians. The production wants me to do that. So I'm not an agent. I know what you mean though.
So your compensation comes from the production, yes, on a contract that you sign with them.
Yeah, I have deals. There's no incentive financially or any other way for me to hire a musician other than I'm on the gig. Like, in other words, I guess if people are wondering, there's a 20-piece orchestra on a Broadway show. Well, 18, let's be realistic, or 4-piece. It's not going to affect my job.
Okay.
There's no incentive. You know what I mean? In that way. That's where an agent would take pieces. They take 10%, or lawyers take 10%.
Right.
That's not how it works. No. So no, not really an agent at all.
All right. Well, before we go too deep into this music coordination business, I'm wearing a T-shirt that says Memphis the Musical, and I think that was our first and only Broadway thing we did together.
Yes.
And you actually handed me the reins of in-house contractor, and I thank you for that, because it was, first of all, it was an eye-opening experience. It was also a wallet opening experience, because I like the paycheck, but we played together, but we also played together before that in other situations. Tell me about you, Michael Ahrens, as a guitarist. You started out playing guitar. What sparked your interest in picking up that instrument?
Well, I guess the only tie-in to the fact that this is a drumming podcast and I'm the first non-drummer, right?
That is correct.
If in a very weird way, I kind of started playing. Well, I started playing piano when I was about 4, and I took lessons, and I guess I was pretty good. My family thought I was good, but I definitely had aspired to be, get into it. And then I got into metal, Black Sabbath, Rat, Motley Crue, Stryper. Does anyone know Stryper?
Didn't they hand out Bibles back in the day?
Yes. No, but I was, then it got in the harder stuff, like with Black Sabbath, like Metallica, Slayer. And so pretty soon the piano wasn't the instrument that I was interested in anymore, And by the way, the Beatles were always, from when I was 4 until all through that, was the thread, even to this day, was always my favorite. They rose above every other style. You know, they were always my favorite band, regardless of whatever, because we can talk about that later. But I quickly realized the piano wasn't the right instrument for me. So I had a neighbor 2 doors down, my best friend, this guy, David, and his older brother was in a band, and they had a setup in their basement, you know, with amps and drums and everything, but for his brother's band. So we decided in my basement to set up, and I started on drums because I wanted to be a drummer at first. And then we're talking like cardboard boxes and pillows and a drum pad and whatever. And I got a hold of a pair of sticks, you know, and my mom played guitar. Not good, but she had a guitar. She had taken lessons when she was a teenager. So I had an old Harmony acoustic guitar in my basement. So he was just bashing on it. The name of our first band was called Death from Above. After about a week, we were like, let's switch, you know? So then I played guitar, and we were doing this thing where we're switching around all the time. And then it just like, he was better than me and vice versa. So I just started playing guitar. And then my mom started showing me a couple things. Not very advanced, but then that's when I started really getting into it. And then, you know, Halloween rolled around, like my stepdad carved out out of wood, like a guitar, like just a board, you know, plywood. We painted it. We dressed up as Wasp, you know, and
Did you have big hair back then?
With the cod piece and the bust. No, just kidding. But yeah, we really into metal and glam and stuff like that. And then we got serious. You know, then I started taking lessons. I started taking lessons with this guy named Michael Fath, who was my first real guitar teacher in the Northern Virginia, DC area, who was kind of well known in the kind of, he was like a Steve Vai wannabe a little bit, but a little like a little bit more metal, I would say, but like that, you know. And people in the area really dug him, and he was teaching privately. So I got some lessons with him, and I started getting more serious. And my friend David was doing the same thing. He was in marching band, and so we just set up, and we're doing duo, like, you know, learning Slayer, learning Megadeth, Anthrax. And then we started writing, you know, just doing all the things. And then I'll fast forward a little bit because this could go on forever. But
well, I want to hear about that first band that you were in. What was it called again? Not the first band, but the band that you released a cassette with.
Yeah. So my friend David's brother Rob was in a bunch of bands. And by the way, Dave Grohl was around at that time in the same area. I didn't know him, but my friend Dave's brother knew him because he was his age. Dave's like 4 or 5 years older than me. So there was a scene, you know. We were a little too young for that scene, you know. So there were some friends that were that age that were looking for a guitar and a drummer and a practice space. So my buddy's brother Rob was like, well, my younger brother's pretty good, so like check him out. And they were there, and they were like 18 and we were 14, you know, 13 and 14. And that band was called Spring Heel Jack. We started gigging 14, 15 years old, and we were like in a van, like going into DC, playing Club Asylum, Safari Club. There was a place in Virginia called Zax or Jax, something like that. Metal, you know, it's all metal clubs, you know, with mosh pits and all kinds of crazy stuff. My mom and my dad were divorced, so I lived with my mom and stepdad and older brother. And my mom around that time was sick with cancer. So yeah, so she was sick, and like, you know, I wasn't in this kind of household where it was a free for all. You know, I mean, I had rules and like not strict, but like not. My buddy David, his mom was like no supervision. I mean, there were bands and parties going in and out of that house all the time. But like, we were not like that. But somehow I just, you know, it was the late 80s, early 90s, and nobody cared. You know, no cell phones, no checking in. It was just like, come home when it's dark, you know. So that band was going on for a while. And then she passed away. My mom passed away in 91. So I moved in with my dad in DC. So my dad had been living in DC in DuPont Circle the whole time, and I saw him all the time. I saw him every other weekend.
Wait. You were in DuPont Circle in 1991?
Correct.
You remember Kent Mill Records?
Correct. Yes. I went there
Holy
all the
cow.
time.
I was working there at that time.
Really?
That's so fascinating.
Wow.
Wow.
Did we
Yeah.
just discover this?
I was there from probably 91 to 93 or maybe 1990.
Oh, I was definitely in there. I was at the cutout bin.
Yes.
Right
In the
walked in
back.
on the left.
Oh, I remember it being in the back though.
Well, maybe you moved it. Oh, I remember the cassettes. Yeah, the cutout bin and
Wow, that's
yeah, I can't
fascinating.
remember. And there was a Chesapeake Bagel Bakery right around there. Do you remember that? That's where I
I
worked.
remember there was a Riggs Bank. Remember
Yes,
Riggs Bank?
I had an account there on the corner, right at the
Yes.
mouth of DuPont Circle.
Yes. Remember the bookstore across the street?
Second story books.
Yes. I think that's still there.
It is. I
Oh,
just
such
was
a great
there last
bookstore.
month. Yeah, I bought a lot of records there.
Yeah.
DC was a wild place around then, and here I was, 15, and so I moved in with my dad, and a little bit of a kind of odd circumstances. So he lived in an apartment right around DuPont, right on DuPont Circle in Northwest Washington, 1-bedroom apartment, and my brother and I were like, he's like, well, okay, I got to find a house, like bigger place, and long story short, we don't have to get into it, but he couldn't get a place. So he, at the last minute, and we had school. So this was in October of 91. And I was a sophomore in high school. And I've been going to high school in Virginia, Northern Virginia, and had a suburban lifestyle pretty much. And now I'm in the city. And my dad was like, well, he can go to a DC public school. Or there's this school. And my aunt, his sister, my Aunt Ruth, were like, well, there's a school, the Duke Ellington School of the Arts. And, he has to audition, but he plays guitar. He's good. Maybe he'll get in. And that would be a lot better than like just a DC public school, which was never mind, So it was getting late in the year to enroll. Like it was October. My mom passed away on the 15th. So, I'm sorry, on the 7th. So this was probably November by now. And I had missed a month of school. So yeah, I mean, it was like now moving. And so my dad got an apartment as a temporary solution in the same building on the 3rd floor. He was on the 7th, a studio apartment, my brother and I. So I'm 15, my brother's 18, 19, and I'm 15, and we're in this studio apartment in DC. And now I say that story now as an adult, and people are like, that's crazy. But it's so weird. And as a parent now, it's abnormal. It's abnormal.
15 and 19-year-old in a studio apartment in DC living by yourselves.
Well, my dad was upstairs, but
Yeah.
he never had kids around. And so me as a 15-year-old going through something like that, and we won't get heavy on this podcast, but going through something like that, I was kind of like, wow, well, this is all new and exciting. There was an element of excitement, like here I am in DC, and I visited, but now I live here and I'm in this apartment, and now I'm gonna I have all my stuff, my guitars. So now we're in Duke Ellington, and the guy who ran the jazz program there, who was kind of the head of the music program, this guy Davey Yarborough, who to this day, if there's one person who basically saved my life, it's that man right there. So he was, and he's a sax player in the DC area. I like to say he's kind of like the Wynton Marsalis of education in DC. What Wynton has done for Lincoln Center and jazz education and all that. He's that guy in DC, but on a much smaller level. He wasn't after the stardom. He never broke out of education. He can do that. He's as good as anybody, but he devoted his life to education. He took local gigs. He never did the fame thing. So nobody knows who he is except people in education, and a lot of jazz artists know who he is. And a lot of famous jazz artists have come through his program. He's a very, very important person in DC and in my life. So, my dad and aunt were like, listen, I know it's too late, we can't enroll, but here's our situation. He's like, well, have him come down and audition. So they drove me and we walked in. If you watch Dave Chappelle's special, forget which one, he talks about Duke Ellington, because when he graduated the year I started. he talks about when he walked in, and it's funny, but it's exactly the way it was. It's like you walk in and there's like people dancing all over the walls, and like jazz is playing, and like people are running around singing, and like there's people painting, like on the walls, murals, and there's just like shit going on all over. And you're like, what is happening? It's just like an artistic circus, it's just in a great way. So I walk in there and I'm just like, what is happening here? I mean, I'd never seen anything like that. And everybody's like, who are you? Like, what are you doing here? You want to come in, And it's an inner city school, but you have to audition to get in there. And there's no tuition, and it's funded, it's city funded and it's actually publicly funded. It's not a private school. It is funded by the city and private donors and stuff. So Mr. Yarbrough sees me, and I said, I'm not bringing my guitar. I'm not coming. At first I was like, I'm not walking in here. I'm not doing this. And my aunt was like, come on, just, and I'm like, nope, I'm not going here. What the hell is this? So Mr. Yarbrough was there. He met us and he's like, oh, don't worry. We got guitars upstairs. Come on. So I just went up with him, and I don't really remember. It was a long time ago, but, I don't remember what I played, but I remember not really wanting to do well. I was like, I don't want to go here. So I'm just going to play bullshit, But whatever it was enough for him to accept me. So I got in, and then I went, and it's kind of a blur. It's kind of a blur when I started, but wake up in the morning, go upstairs to my dad's, have breakfast, go out to the city bus, go to 35th and R Street. So that's a very different experience from like suburban, playing in your friend's basement, wait for the school bus, and like driving in your, Chevette. You know what I mean? Very different experience. So then the next thing was I was in the guitar ensemble, and a guy named Tom Newman, who I recently reconnected with after 20 years. My guitar teacher, Tom Newman, great guitar player, was running the jazz guitar program there. And I hated jazz. I was like, I like metal. I'm a guitarist. I don't know what, the beginning of the day, academics was 8:30 to 1 or 1:30 or something. And then the second half of the day, 1 to 5 was art. So it was a long day. Academics, I have to say, were pretty lousy. DC public schools and in an art school where no one gave a shit about academics. They were like, when can we play guitar? When can we do visual arts? And the teachers there were like, I mean, it's like chaos. The guy's trying to teach math and people are throwing shit. It was that kind of thing until the arts. Everyone had ADD. Everybody was like, just artistic and like whatever. And it was like early 90s, inner city public school education. So I always say my academics kind of stopped at 10th grade.
Oh, wow.
I got all A's, but an A there is like a C in real life to me.
Well, the interesting thing about that is that you have to use a lot of your mathematical skills and organizational skills to be a music coordinator. Like, how did you?
Interesting that you say that, because yes, I didn't think I had those skills until I became a music coordinator. So, but yeah, it was a long day, so the academics, and then so I'd walk in after lunch to Mr. Newman's room, and there'd be a turntable, and he'd be playing every day some record, Kenny Burrell or Freddie Hubbard, or he was very hip. Like I remember he would play, and it was all vinyl. He would play, was playing a Dave Spinoza record once. So he was like hipping us to New York session players then, and I didn't like any of it. I was like, I don't get this, and then he'd be like, okay, and you put the metronome on. It was one of those big ones that's like,
mm-hmm.
He'd be like, play the melodic minor modes, go. And he wore sunglasses, and he'd come in with Chinese food, and he'd sit there and fall asleep. And we would play melodic minor modes for like an hour. And he would only wake up if people started laughing or screwing around. So it was wild. So, like I was not into it, and he could tell, and he wanted me to get me into jazz. I'm like, I don't like horns. So one day he's like, I think you're going to like this. And he put on Mahavishnu, and because he knew that he thought I'd like John McLaughlin, playing through Marshall full stacks and shredding, but with like this amazing orchestra behind him, and playing with all these changes and reharmonizations and odd meters and all that stuff. And that just opened up my mind. So I became a John McLaughlin fanatic. I had to have every record. And then that got me into Miles because Bitches Brew and, you know, and Silent Way and all those records with McLaughlin. So, so that was his way to get me in. And we've just talked about that a couple of weeks ago. I reconnected with him. He knew what he was doing. So then that got me to jazz. Then I became a jazz Nazi, you know, then I hated everything else except metal. But, you know, then I became a very intense jazz student. I was still in the band Spring Heel Jack, when you know, which was a metal band while I was at Ellington, like the first couple of years. So I would be gigging on the weekends at the, you know, Safari Club and the 930 Club. We did 930 once, and then doing the jazz school. And after a while, they got another guitar player. I don't even remember we just kind of dissolved because then Dave, my friend, went to college, and, you know, like they just stopped. We kind of broke up. But I had long hair, was still into metal, but I wasn't like, my mind had been exposed to jazz, and creatively I was starting to write, you know, I was like transcribing, I was doing all of those things at a high school level. I was into everything, you know, and again, the thread of the Beatles and Led Zeppelin, that was still always, I never got out of that stuff. Mr. Newman and Mr. Yarbrough pressed me to go to New York. They're like, you should be at Manhattan School of Music and study with Rodney Jones, because I was really into just groove jazz. You know, I liked Grant Green, Wes Montgomery, George Benson. You know, they played me Holdsworth and Metheny and Schofield, and I didn't really dig that style of guitar playing. I appreciated it, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And Rodney Jones was the guy that did what I wanted to do, and he was in New York, so that's why I went there. It was either that or New England Conservatory to study with Mick Goodrick, who was another great one. And they were going to give me money, but I just wanted to be in New York.
So you didn't think of Berkeley at all?
At the time, I don't know if I even looked into it that much, because it was like every guitar player went there, and it was like shredders. I just remember seeing catalogs and people were playing like Ibanez Gems, you know, which, all right, it's a drumming podcast. Like the Steve Vai guitar with the handle.
Oh, okay,
you know,
okay. Okay.
And I just remember in my mind, I thinking it's like, it's just too many guitar players, you know, like, and I want to be in New York. Nothing against Berkeley. Berkeley's changed a lot since then, or maybe it hasn't. Just wasn't for me, you know. When I was in school, there was a club, Augie's, which is now Smoke. I would do some late night jam sessions there. People's houses. People just got together and played in people's apartments. Everybody had these huge apartments back then.
Was Broadway ever on your radar?
Okay, so no, it wasn't. And that's the thing. The theme is mentors. You know, Mr. Yarbrough, Mr. Newman, really Mr. Yarbrough, and Rodney, and then Michael Keller later. We'll talk about that. So, you know, I did some club dates. Rodney started recommending me on stuff when I was around a senior. You know, like I actually finished a little early because some of my Ellington credits spilled into Manhattan School of Music, so I was able to graduate a little early. Like my last year, I didn't have that many classes. But Rodney recommended me to this producer who ended up marrying Liza Minnelli. She had that weird marriage, the big wedding, like back in 2000, late 90s. So that producer, I started working with him in the 90s before he met Liza. And I hooked up with him because Rodney couldn't do a gig. And he put me on a lot of big concerts, like galas, but not galas like at Cipriani's or, you know, Broadway Cares. No, I'm talking like Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with Michael McDonald and the Temptations and Denise Williams and Luther Vandross and Ray Charles. So like I ended up playing, I went from like nothing, like teaching guitar here and there to high school students to playing with them. Let's talk about resumes for a second. There's a fine line when you say, I play with Ray Charles. And when he walked on stage and did one song and you were in the house band.
Right.
That said, you should put that on your resume.
Why is that?
I played with Paul McCartney. Okay, he's my idol. I can die now. I played with Paul McCartney, but I didn't. I mean, and I've said this, and some people disagree with me. Like, no, my God, no, you played with Paul McCartney. I was playing at an event, and it was a benefit for Frank Lesser, who's a Broadway composer, famous composer, and MPL Communications, Paul McCartney's company, owned the publishing to that. So they're like, he's going to be here, you know. So we didn't know he was going to be there. We were just playing with like, it was an orchestra backing up like Audra McDonald and all these people and stars like that. And then at the last minute, Paul's like, I'm going to get up and sing Slow Boat to China with this orchestra. And we rehearsed it and did it. So I played one song and I played guitar like Freddie Green style. So do I say that Michael Ahrens is a versatile guitarist who has played with Paul McCartney? I mean, yes and no. You have to phrase it correct.
Would you think that worked with Paul McCartney or shared the stage with?
I didn't work with him.
Share the stage with.
You could say that. Or you could say he has performed live and or recorded with, and then have a list. That's true. I mean,
share the air with.
I mean, you have to just, you have to pretend that you're someone reading someone's resume too. How does it come across? That said, it is a huge accomplishment. Shouldn't be shy.
So let's just talk about that. Speaking since I have you on this podcast, since you do hire musicians, having a resume, does it matter that somebody has a resume? And let me send you my resume, and when you look at it, and Clayton Craddock has worked with Denise Williams, and I forgot who he worked with in Liverpool.
We worked with the Stylistics.
Yeah, Stylistics. Thank you. Clayton Craddock worked with the Stylistics, and Denise Williams and Mono Neon.
Yeah, right. That's right. Clayton and I did a gig with Mono Neon.
Yeah, let's just go back to that for a minute. Yeah, Mike, I got a gig with David Guest's Wonderful World of Little People, whatever it was. And he had these concerts in Liverpool, and he'd bring people over from the United States. Denise Williams, Stylistics. I forgot who the other person was.
Yeah. Did we play with Russell Tompkins? And the Stylistics.
Yeah, it's probably those two.
Billy Paul?
No, I don't think he was on that gig. But anyway, we went over there and we saw this kid. I remember the bass player who recommended him. What's his name? Jackie
Clark.
Jackie Clark said, "Man, you got to hear this guy. He's going to be the next big thing." Remember, you were telling me this. I was like, "Man, who is this kid?" And he had these glasses on. He was real quiet, and so we have pictures of me, you and him together. But man, he could play his ass off. He can groove, and he was great. Jackie was right.
He was only 14 or 13.
Yeah, and he was really quiet. Next thing you know, Mike sends me this video of this guy in these glasses playing along to people on YouTube. And he's like, that's him. And then everyone knows who Mono Neon is.
Now he's big. Yep.
So yeah, I work with Mono Neon. So when you get a resume and when you're writing your resume as a drummer or a musician that's looking at this, do you recommend saying, like you just alluded to before, Clayton Craddock has worked with, Clayton Craddock has shared the stage, Clayton Craddock has recorded with and played with? And what does it mean to you as a music coordinator looking at somebody's resume? Or do you really look at resumes? Tell me
I do. And I didn't always, during COVID, I created this platform, this software platform, and it's become a kind of a big part of my workflow now. It's an app, it's a whole thing. And if you go to the website, m2music.nyc, you can register, right? So I started that, and that links into the platform. So long story short, it's a place where people can create a profile, log in, and upload videos, picture, bio, and upload a resume, info about them, links to their music or whatever. And it's a great way to I now have a centralized database where I can refer to new players, or existing Broadway musicians that I have on shows. They all have profiles. So that said, I didn't used to listen to look at resumes because I just want to know how someone plays, and I want to know how they are with other people. So recommendations are key to me. If a musician that I really respect, like you, if you were like, hey man, this drummer is killing, I just I just played a gig with, well, you wouldn't play a gig with him, but this bass player is really killing. I just played a gig with him, and then I hung out. He's easy to get along with. He has a ton of experience. He's played with the stylistics, whatever. You see, it all matters. It all matters. But to me, the most important thing is if a musician I respect is referring someone to me, or vice versa. If someone I've never heard of says, I've recently gotten into this. Yes, I played with Paul McCartney. I've done all this stuff. It could be galas. I could have just bumped into him on the street and said I met him, whatever. It doesn't matter what the resume says. If I click on a link and see, wow, they sound really good, but maybe they're a complete maniac, who are their reference? Oh, Clayton Craddock's a reference. I'm going to call him up, and then you say, oh man, stay away from that guy. Or, yeah, actually I did a gig. He's great, so it all matters. It all matters. If it's really hard, if you're totally unknown and new in town and you say all those things, have no references and no way for anyone to hear you play, video links, links to music, there's got to be a way. And with the internet, it's kind of unacceptable to not have a way for people to hear you play, with all of the access there is now. For me, I have lists of people in my head that I know may or may not be on a show, that I know I already know I want to use them. But sometimes and now, especially today, there's a big calling for, bringing more people into the community. There's a lot going on now in the world. Also, there's a generational shift in the industry. There's a lot of, and there is now I was talking to some friends about this recently. When I started playing Broadway 22 years ago, the people I was like, oh my God, they're like, the Dave Spinozas and the Larry Salzmans. I'm not trying to age them. I'm just saying, like, they're the people I came to New York. I started doing Broadway and came to New York because of players like that. I'm at the age they were back when so you have players now that are coming up that are looking like to me, I don't know, or you. So that's kind of like the generational thing. So who are those players now? Because they're the people that should be looked at, and they don't know. Some of them just don't know what to do to be noticed. And their methods of trying to get noticed are way different than ours were. And people complain about I complain about the methods, but you have to have an open mind.
To continue producing the high-quality podcast you're listening to, publishing engaging newsletter content, and posting YouTube videos, we would appreciate any financial contributions you can make. At this time, we have no advertisers, and we'd like to keep it that way. Our staff is small but growing. We can only produce a show with listener contributions from people like you. There are a couple of ways you can do that. You can sign up to be a monthly or annual subscriber at BroadwayDrumming101.com. You can also contribute any amount you wish through PayPal at paypal.me/BroadwayDrumming101 or through Venmo at BroadwayDrumming101. We appreciate any support you can give. Don't forget to subscribe to the Broadway Drumming 101 YouTube page. You'll find more content that isn't featured on the podcast or on the Broadway Drumming 101 Instagram page. Make sure when you subscribe to the YouTube page, you click on the button to be notified when a new video is published. Be sure to visit our new shop at merchandise.broadwaydrumming101.com. Thanks again for listening to the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast.
When somebody reaches out to you and says, hi, my name is Clayton Craddock. I'm new into town. I just like to take you out for coffee and pick your brain. How do you respond to that?
The answer is no, not having coffee. That's the answer. But
why?
First of all, this having coffee, pick the brain, is a kind of a joke amongst a lot of Broadway musicians, because it's such a verbatim line that has entered into the into the industry, has entered into the psyche. This, like, in that, it's almost as if there was a seminar at musical theater college at NYU or somewhere, and there was a seminar with 750 seats, like this, auditorium style, and there was some professor that said, everybody listen right now. If you say this exact line in these words, write this down in these words. I would like to have coffee with you and pick your brain about the business. Say that. I guarantee you will get a gig. I almost feel like that happened because all of a sudden everybody's saying this line. I'm like, who's telling these people to say this? And I think that people listening might agree that that's a new phenomenon. I know that it's coming from a place. People want to know how the industry works. They're interested in Broadway. They want to talk about it. And there's ways to do that. I'd much rather get a phone call from someone I don't know, to be honest. I may not be available. I may take a couple of days to call them back. But Michael Keller, we can talk about him too in a bit. He always responded, or he always picked up the phone and would talk to people. You can't not talk to people. You can't ignore people. You have to respond to every email. It's rude. It's not professional. So I always manage to do that. So I don't mean to joke about the coffee, picking the brain in all seriousness. It's the answer is no, meaning I just don't have time. Like, I live in New Jersey. I'm not going to come into the city and take a meeting unless it's work related. And while that is work related, it's work related, meaning like I'm on the clock, work related, and I'm busy, So if I'm going to carve out time, I might, if I'm going to come into town for some other reason, I might say, oh, hey, I'm going to be in town by, 2 to 2:30 if you want to meet up for coffee. But there's a 4% chance that's going to happen. I would much rather just cut to the chase. Somebody's looking to get into Broadway, call me up. If we have time for a meeting, maybe we can talk for 10 minutes. I try and make time. I really do. It's become very hard, though. I think that the best way for a new musician to get integrated into the scene and learn about this stuff is there's really no secrets. You come to town and you cold call people that you want to sub on the show. I was on tour with Liza Minnelli, and Tom Barney was in the band, the bass player, Steely Dan and whatever, but he plays with a lot of people, but it's in Lion King. And we were hanging out with friends, and I hadn't thought about Broadway at that time. This was 2000, 2001. And I said, you play in the Lion King? Oh yeah, that's cool. And he was telling me, I was asking questions. How does that work? Where do how are you able to do that in this? And well, it's 8 shows a week. You can take off 50%. You can do this, you can do that. Wow, that sounds great. You don't have to tour? Well, I can, when I'm in town, it's every night. I can do, have subs. And he was explaining how the business works. And I said, well, how do I get into that? He said, there's this guitar player there, Kevin Kuhn, who's a well-known guy and in the Broadway scene. And you should call him up. I'll recommend you. But when we get back from tour, well, let's talk about it. So we got back from England, and I reminded him, he said, okay, cool. Don't call him yet. When I get to the show tonight, I'll mention it. I'll let you know when it's cool to call him. So Tom, to his credit, he said, okay, I told him all about you. Just call him up. So I called up Kevin, and he said, a cold call before cell phones. I mean, cell phones were there around, but nobody did that. No emails, nothing like that. So I said, hey, Kevin, my name is Michael Ahrens. I did this, I did that. Tom Barney, he said, yeah, Tom says you're great, and this and that. And he was kind of vetting me. He was like, okay, do you have any Broadway experience? Have you ever played a show with a conductor before? I said, no, not really. I mean, a little bit in college, Okay, have you ever, played calypso? Have you ever played ukulele? Have you ever played some nylon string?
You could have said, well, I work with Paul McCartney.
It was way before that, man. No, but he was asking some questions that were relevant to the show. So then no promises. He said, you know what? I don't normally let people sub that I don't know, but Tom had a lot of great things to say about you. So come to the show and watch. Here's how it works. So I watched the show, and then he said, take this book, and he was literally like, here, and he's like, go to Kinko's and copy it and come back. And I'm like, is this the only copy? He's like, yeah, don't lose it. And I was just like, oh, no PDFs, none of that. So I copied the book, and that's what I studied, and I watched 3 times. I watched once him, and there was no avions in that theater. This is the old theater. This was the New Amsterdam, all acoustic. And I watched the show once, him and his book. The second show I watched the conductor, and there was no conductor cam. There was no recording. Wasn't that? There was none of that. And then the third show I watched everything, but I watched his feet, his pedals, the pedal board. Because there wasn't a ton of pedals, but there was a lot of movement, and a lot of effects and stuff. And he had stuff written in his book, but I had to I took diligent notes, and then I shed the hell out of that. And I set up pedals and everything, and I played along to that for maybe a month. And then I called him up and said, I think I'm ready. And he said, okay. And then he gave me a show, and then I did it. And then I was like, oh, I wonder how it went, Actually, Tommy Igoe conducted my very first Broadway show, because Joe Church was the conductor. I watched him all 3 times. And so I was kind of used to his, I memorized it. You had to memorize. There was no referring to a video. There was no iPhone, like, let me take a video. No, man, I just had to. So I think there was a lot more pressure, because you're like, oh shit, is he going to give the downbeat on this time, or is he going to give a 3/4? I don't remember. Well, you should have written that down, sorry. So there was a lot of that school hard knocks. And then, so I get to my first show, and I was there at like 6:30, I was like really, I don't think I was ever more nervous, really. And then this tall guy gets on the podium, blonde hair, it was Tommy. And I was like, why is the drummer on why is he there? And then I think it was Sean McDaniel or Carter McLean. Like, Carter and I started subbing around the same time. 2000, you have to ask Carter. But I remember either he played my first show or I played his first show. One of the two. He'll say that I played his first show, or he'll say I played his, whatever. One of the two. But Sean, I remember subbing with him. I remember subbing with Sean. So I was like, what's going on? And his arms were big, and it was like a totally different experience, man. But it was good in the sense that I kind of broke in. And I think he conducted 1 or 2 before Joe came back from wherever he was and conducted me. So I felt like I had done it a few times. And then Joe was like, oh yeah, you sound great. So but man, like, it was a different way to break in back then. It was like the gatekeeper was talent and preparation.
It was based on a call that you had. Well, you worked with Tom Barty, then you called Kevin to get the opportunity to sub.
It was a different world back then, and I'm just going to say something, and I'm not trying to disrespect any of the way things are now, but it was hard to get into any scene back then. I just remember it was like, oh, you can't play Broadway. You don't know anyone. You can't, it's a close. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying it's a scene, and you're trying to break into a scene, and it's a small community of people. And you don't just walk in the door and it's not like anyone's blocking you. It's just that New York's a tough place, and people are here for a reason. People work their way here for a reason. I worked my way here for a reason. And I'm not trying to prevent anybody. I'm in a position where I'm bringing people in, and I want to bring people in. But I just feel like the way in was very hard. You had to know somebody. Well, Tom Barney's not going to tell Kevin Kuhn this guy can play if you can't. And I was on a gig with Tom, and it was a professional gig, and he heard me and he thought that. So there was that. Doesn't mean you're going to succeed on Broadway. It does not mean that. Many, many amazing players from the recording world, film world, touring, pop world, come in and crash and burn on Broadway. At the end of the day, it can be easy to get in a sub chair or a regular chair, or it can be extremely hard with lots of roadblocks. But at the end of the day, when the downbeat comes in, it's sink or swim. And that's just the way it is. And if you want a high quality product, I like to think that, everybody's route to Broadway is different. There's new young people who want to play Broadway straight out of high school. That's their goal. And then there's other people who have a world of experience doing other gigs and things, don't want to tour anymore, don't want to whatever. So they're in town, and Broadway is the scene that is the most revered. So they want to do that, so they don't have to tour anymore. But they have like 25, 30 plus years of experience doing other stuff, and they bring that to the table, for better or worse. See, because Broadway is a very refined skill. It's not for everybody.
So the musicians that have crashed and burned, that have been part of other scenes, like like jazz musicians that have played on several different records and toured with all kinds of people, you've heard them come in, or you've heard about them coming in and just not surviving. Why do you think that is?
Thank you again for joining us. If you like what you heard, subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please take a moment to give us a nice rating and review. Stay tuned for more.